Hello. We're going to go ahead and get started right now if everyone's ready. Thank you so much for coming. We know that you just had hopefully a delicious lunch and you're ready to relax a little bit maybe. But you're also here for a topic that is really, really important to all of us. I'm Carson and I'll tell you a little bit more about myself later. We also have Henry Stokes from the Texas State Libraries and Archives Commission and Lucy Wedeking from the Stanford Carnegie Library. Let's hear it.
Yeah.
that's right.
We're on a food coma.
Yeah, well, I know I'm going to have to pull it out of you this afternoon. I know that, and that's okay. That's part of the gig. Speaking of gig, the gig that we're going to talk about today is Gigabit libraries, because that's what we want everyone to be. We want every library in the country, no matter where you are, to have a gigabit connection. Now, that might sound like a tall order, right? Because we know it's a tall order, but if you don't aim high, you can never get to where you want to go. And so this is one of the reasons that we call that program the Toward Gigabit Libraries. We're also going to look at the Libraries Connecting Texas program, which is making some incredible strides right here in Texas. And most importantly, we're going to hear an actual view from the library what this program and the programs are actually like from the perspective of a librarian. Isn't it about time to hear that, right? Yes. So having me tell you how great everything is or how bad it is, it's good to hear from peers and colleagues and folks that share some of our experiences together and to do that. So that's really, really wonderful. We'll also have lots of time for questions and answers. And I would say, and I think we're all agreeable to this, since we don't have 90 people in the room, we've got a perfect size to have a nice intimate discussion. So if at any time you'd like to make a comment or you have a question, please just speak up and we would love to talk about it and address it. Does that sound good? Okay, very good. And the food coma is still kicking in? So, okay. All right. Very, very good. So I'm going to hand off to Henry Stokes. And Henry's going to tell us why we care.
So perhaps this is all just preaching to the choir, but I think it's important to talk about how important broadband is for not just public libraries, but for Texans, all communities. High-speed internet is really what communities need to compete in the digital world in areas of education, workplace development, economic development. All of these areas require high-speed internet now, and it's sort of assumed that you already have them. Public libraries have become a spot where you can get that high-speed internet, and especially students, job seekers, business owners, entrepreneurs, and many others rely on that in order to get that online information to apply for jobs, to train, to get consumer health information. And often communities cannot have access to the internet unless they go to the public library. 60% across the country, the only place that their community can get that internet is at the public library. We at the Texas State Library care about this especially because, well, it's right in our strategic plan. We want to support efforts to ensure digital inclusion. So our mission is to provide Texans access to information needed to be informed, productive citizens. And so we really want to look at ways, we have the texture databases that are going to get more and more robust and require even faster speeds. So we want to make sure that our libraries can use those. We want to make sure that that libraries are well set up to promote these different services, and they can only do it through high-speed internet. And I kind of look too, if we look at look to the future, we can see that all these services that libraries are going to have and provide are going to have to require broadband. So here I've just listed just a handful of things that, although they look kind of futuristic, they're already here. So we've got streaming videos, of course, we already know about that and how much that relies on faster and faster speeds. Software tutorials for education, virtual reference. In fact, the whole idea of virtual communication with Facebook buying virtual reality and having kiosks in libraries where you can actually speak through video conferencing with healthcare professionals. The Internet of Things, if you've heard of that, the idea of everything in our world having computing within it, sensors, responding to the environment. Everything's going to be using the cloud, right? And so you have to have high speed in order to do that. And as our patrons begin to discover these services, hopefully through the public library or elsewhere, they're going to be coming in, and just like they did when they had the mobile devices, the iPads, coming to the libraries and wanting to know, okay, how does this work? And libraries are going to have to be in a position not only to provide service to assist patrons with those devices, with those new technologies, but also have the high-speed internet in order to even use them. This last one, research-grade microscopes in Chattanooga, they actually have a gigabit connection throughout the whole city. The library has that. And they've actually partnered with research facilities in California in order to bring in a live stream of a research-grade microscope for their students that come in. So the students can actually, within the library, play with a live 4D, digital display of a microscope and interact with microscopic life live. It's pretty amazing. And that's only, how do you make that happen? Broadband. So here in Texas, we have a problem, and that's that when we conducted statewide library speed tests through the public libraries, we collected that data and took a little snapshot, compared it to what the speeds were recommended by the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission. They had recommended that libraries of certain sizes reach certain speeds. Well, only 6% of Texas public libraries reach those speeds based on their population size. So there was a lot of room for growth in this area. And furthermore, we recognize that often within these communities, within the libraries themselves, there is often a lack of technical expertise, a lack of funding in order to support higher speeds, a lack of availability, of course, the broadband wasn't even available, and a lack of just understanding and awareness of the value of the relevance of why libraries should be seizing on this opportunity to keep getting faster speeds. And at the State Library, we've done a number of different initiatives, particularly for the first two. We have some, you can do IT trainings with Carson, online and in person. We have some webinars and things to keep getting the word out, including this particular session. And in particular, though, we wanted to figure out how we could help with the funding part of it. But so we've two projects, which we'll talk about today. The Gigabit Toolkit program, brought to you by LSTA, Internet 2, and Carson Block. We, at the Texas State Library, partnered with them to be part of their pilot, and we'll talk about more of that in a second. And then I'll also talk about the Libraries Connecting Texas program that the Texas State Library got. So let's start with the toolkit, and I'll pass it back to Carson.
Sounds good. So the first time I heard about this idea, I was actually driving back from Alpine, and I made the mistake. Have you ever made this mistake? You think, I'm going to drive this big long stretch, and I think the connection might be okay. Maybe if it's a short call. Okay, so I do this a lot. I like play this game with myself because I've got to make phone calls sometimes. And so I was driving back from Alpine to talk to who would become my project partners on this project, and the call turned out to be a very long call. So do you think I had a dropout? Oh, yes, yes. You are correct. And I was also, I didn't tank up in Alpine before trying to get back. So I had a number of simultaneous priorities going on in my head as I was driving. You've all been there, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So what a beautiful way for a project to be born, right? To really be focused on the things that are causing issues. So I'll tell you a little bit though about Internet 2. I'm not a member of Internet 2 myself, but my partners are who we did the IMLS grant with on this, and I was the technical piece. Internet 2 is an organization that has more than 300 higher education members, but it also has other members as well. This was started way back in the day when Internet 1 was just a baby, so like 20 odd years ago. Internet 2 was born as a way to connect research institutions together. Internet 1 was able to keep pace, so there was not a need for the Internet 2 being the next generation of the Internet. However, there was a huge need to have a private network for education and other folks, K-12 schools, libraries, museums, health institutions, all and some some capacity are connected to Internet 2. Now, not all of us are on there, of course. You can see the red dots up there, see where it's really aggregated there in the upper northeastern part of the country, as well as in the California area, and that kind of makes sense, right? But that's where a lot of the educational institutions are as well. But there's also a program called the US UCAN program, CAN standing for Community Anchors, or Community Anchor Institutions. And the idea is that this is where Internet 2 is promoting not the university sort of thing, but looking at other entities within parts of the country where these connections can take place. So it's just another way to get connections out there. But IMLS contacted them, and then Internet 2 contacted me because of work that I've done in rural America around library connectivity. And so we got a $250,000 grant. We got this in the spring of 2016. It's hard to believe it's been this long that we've had this. And the idea was to have a grant to develop training curriculum and self-assessment material that we're calling a toolkit for library broadband infrastructure. And the idea of the toolkit is it would be something that would be self-directed. Our lofty aim for this is that any person working in a library, whether it's a small public library or a tribal library in a rural area, could get this toolkit and start working through those issues that they have with their networks. We haven't solved the problem of the last mile of connectivity yet, but we have a lot of attention on solving the last mile of connectivity. We have to also solve the problem of the last 100 meters of connectivity, and that's the wiring and the network components within library buildings in rural and tribal areas. They're in rough spots. They're not in good repair. A lot of places, a lot of folks do not know what to do or how to address problems that they have. Problems can be a mystery, right, Lucy? Problems can be a mystery. And so we wanted to demystify that sort of thing through the toolkit. And we knew that was a lofty goal, but that's just the kind of thing that we love to do. And so we wanted to target very rural and tribal libraries, of course. Rural libraries are in bad shape. Tribal libraries are even worse. Sometimes a tribal library, or what a tribe will call a library, might be a public access computer in a tribal office that's only available when that tribal office is open. So that is their library and their outreach. And that's why we also wanted to make sure that we got to tribes as well, so that we could really have a visceral picture of what needs that we have, and then come up with a way to fix that. So we also, of course, partnered with state library offices and what are called R&E networks. Those are research and education networks. Because there's a lot of different entities out there doing different pieces of the puzzle. We're not all working all together, and so this is one way that we could try to find ways to work together as well, so that made us really excited. To develop the project, we had to put together a draft of materials, and the last thing that we wanted to do was to say, we think you ought to do this. Don't you love it when someone comes to your library and says, we think you ought to do this based on our expertise? Instead, what we did is we did the best job that we could, and we started an iterative process that continues right now. We're going to be wrapping up. We've got a couple more pilot visits to make. But every time that we take the toolkit out, we get feedback both verbally and in written form, and we roll that into the next version of the toolkit, because we don't want to be right. We want to do the right thing, and we can only do the right thing by getting actual feedback. Despite our best intentions, sometimes you do the wrong thing. So we want to make sure that we have something that would work, because that's the idea, is that rubber meets the road. Through that iterative process, we've been to a number of states, and then we're going to release this toolkit here this summer. And it will be free and available for everyone to use, and we anticipate that a lot of state library organizations will use it as a precursor to getting ready for E-rate, for rounds of E-rate, because it's a really good way to see what sort of equipment that you might need. The toolkit itself is supposed to do three things all at the same time. Number one, it's an educational workbook. I know that we're all surveyed to death here. Does anybody like really look forward to getting a survey these days? You okay? By percentage, we have 1% of the room. Like no. But because we're getting a lot of that. Well, in this case, the idea is that this is educational, so it's not just questions, and it's not just clues on how to answer, but actually instructions on how to answer some of these technology questions. It's also through that process a tool to self-assess what your technology is like inside your library, and it's also a platform for advocacy. We're intending this as a way for you not just to say, "Oh, look, I was right, it's broke," but to go, "It's broke, and we need to fix it," and to work with the folks in your life, whether it's your city, your county, your library board, your volunteers, whoever, to address the problem. So we wanted it to do all three of those things. Part of this process is just taking a walkabout and looking at what you have, and what kind of shape is it in. That's kind of the way the toolkit is formed. But we look at the wired network, the wireless network, devices on that network, your broadband services or the services that you're providing to your library, broadband funding, and other sorts of things that kind of go in a sequence like you see down there. That's the pilot sequence where we would look at pilot libraries, ask for them to fill out an intake form so that we would have a sense of what condition they were in before we got out there, and then go through that toolkit process. You'll see at the end the post-pilot survey is one of the most important things to us, because we're, as practitioners, we're relatively certain that if we come out, we can do a pretty good job together to make good recommendations. So we're not as worried about that, but we really need to hear from the folks who participated, and we have every time, and it's made the toolkit even better. Now, this is the first version of the toolkit right here. It's actually changed a little bit because we're kind of geeky, the way that we got started, and we wanted to put this in a Google Doc. So has anyone used Google Documents? Good. Okay, so a couple people have, and some other folks have not used Google Documents. For those who have not, Google Documents is basically like having the same copy of Microsoft Word, but everyone in your team can get on it and make changes. You can track those changes, you can see those changes, approve those changes, and you don't have to be in the same place at the same time. And that was really important for our team because we were geographically spread. I'm based in Colorado, even though I'm rarely there. I'm based in Colorado. One of our team members was in Washington, D.C., and the other in Washington State. And so we needed to do something simple like this where we could divide things up, where we have our question on the left-hand column, and then on the right-hand column, we have our guide on how to answer that question. So that worked really, really good. The good news is that a graphic artist at Internet 2 has gotten a hold of this and has made it look much prettier than that. But this was totally functional, and this is why we were able to make changes really quick. We could just drop things in as we needed, or if someone said this word doesn't make sense or this procedure doesn't make sense, we could go in and change that very, very quickly within the Google Doc format. So that worked really, really good. This was a snapshot of our libraries, I think, as of the end of last year, and these are some of the Texas libraries that we visited. These were proposed libraries, and we haven't been able to get out there yet, but we aim to visit 30 libraries. I think at this point we've exceeded that goal. I think we're at 40, and by the time we're done, maybe 45 or more that we will be able to have visited, because we saved as much money as we could throughout the grant process so that we could spend the money visiting and doing good and learning about the toolkit itself. So in the types of libraries that we're visiting, you may recognize yourself in this if you're from a rural library, standalone library without having anyone else, just that's it, the one building sort of library system are the folks that we saw. This is the one that I really like, is how frequently is technical IT support available in the library. 60% here says only when problems arise. So that means that you're in a very or the folks that we're working with are usually in a very reactive mode, and we all hate that, right? So, but that's exactly who we wanted to visit. We wanted to make sure we were not visiting libraries that didn't need to see us, but seeing libraries that actually could benefit from this. And you can see from the pie graph that the only folks that had 11% so far have anytime help for technology. It's pretty low, right? Because we are organizations of technology, no matter what our size is, and so that's a low number. The current level of expertise around working with a broadband connection, probably not that surprising to see. 64% are limited and 26% have none. with less than 10%, less than 9% being very experienced. That's a problem, right? That is like a perfect storm to say we have this reliance on technology to serve our patrons, but we don't have that expertise in-house. So this made us very happy actually to see this, because this is who we wanted to visit, our people again who needed to have our help going through. The other thing that we wanted to tap into is to look at why, why do we have broadband? It's not just because other libraries have it, right? It's not because our friends or neighbors have it. It's because we need to do things in our community. People need access, and I love that access word, because in an urban area we can take that for granted. I still have colleagues that say access is not a problem in this day and age. And it's like, well, maybe not in Silicon Valley, maybe not in Denver. It's a huge problem in so many communities throughout the country. This idea of consistent and reliable availability, that's another thing. Quality, right? So when there's access, the quality of that access can be very, very bad. I love every time I see this, anything that's aspirational to growing our young people, to say we want our students to have access to the tools that they need to learn and to thrive and to create in our world, as well as other needs. And Henry had talked a bunch about that. So you might wonder what we found. This is our top 5 list of bad things that we see. A lot of it's insufficient data wiring, which means either the quality of the wiring in the building is not up to snuff, or there's not enough of the wiring there. It's not getting in all the places that it could be. Of course, wireless technologies are wonderful, but we're still in a mix of needing wired and wireless tech. A lot of inefficient network setups. That could be misconfigured equipment to equipment that is what's called EOL. So I don't know how many geeks we have in here, but EOL, that could be your geek word if you don't have it yet. That means end of life. If something is EOL, end of life, you don't want to keep it, because it will stop functioning at some point in the way that it was supposed to. The other point is it's no longer safe, because there's no longer updates to that, and we all know that security is very important online. So that's all part of the inefficiency and old and or obsolete equipment that we saw. What was huge is poor Wi-Fi coverage as well. So most people had Wi-Fi, but there's always that part in the building where it doesn't work that well. And so we wanted to illuminate that and to bring that forward. And the other was not participating in E-rate. And I know that in the past, whether or not to participate in E-rate for many public libraries was a wash. It was like, well, is it worth all this? Because it's a lot of paperwork and we're not seeing a benefit. With the changes, I think 3 years ago in E-rate, where internal connections are now covered, internal connections being your network components and your Wi-Fi systems and your building wiring and even construction of wiring to the building. With those things being covered under E-rate, I respect your personal opinion on that, but I urge everyone that I work with to look at that and consider the pros and cons, because some of the discounts are substantial, and everyone I've talked to needs to refresh their network. So this is really a good time to look at that. Also, to give a plug for Texas, you'll be going through year number 2 for the E-rate program, and you're going to talk a little bit more about that, right? Okay. This is where we collected our feedback, another big geeky spreadsheet. But you know what's really good about this is you can't see all the columns, but you can probably see a date, you can see a source, and you can see a sign too. That means when we had feedback coming in, something to make the toolkit better, between the 3 of us on the team, we would determine who would be best suited to address that problem. And we have our own accountability loop, but it's just as simple as a spreadsheet that we all shared, so that we could surface problems that we saw and get to work and make them happen. So I'm really, as you can probably tell, I'm really proud of this team, because there's some people you can't trust farther than you can throw them, and in this case the trust level is so high, and that makes all the difference in a good team. The proof is in the pudding though, and that the post survey was really, really important to us. How did your participation in the pilot affect your technical understanding of your broadband information technology environment? Not too bad, right? That's not too bad. To have results where most are satisfied or very satisfied. Knowledge increased in some key areas, including this one right here, right? The broadband connection itself, which is the most essential piece. but we were lacking in that, as well as the wireless Wi-Fi networks, kind of followed by the broadband services and activities, but other items as well. Those were just the top ones that came out from the survey. How would you rate your overall experience? People had a good experience. We were concerned about this because, well, frankly, I know that when I walked in, people were not sure if they wanted to see me or not, because we were going to talk about technology, right? And they weren't all that excited about that. And then by the time, most of the time, by the time we left, it was hard to leave. Because like, wait, I want to show you one more thing. Wait, come over here, come over here. So that was a measure of success, because we know that technology interactions, they can go that other direction where they're not pleasant, they're not useful to you. We also know that everyone has so many pressures on their time. These days, and we knew that we'd be coming in. These visits last 3 to 4 hours, depending on what we need to do, and we just wanted to make sure it was valuable. So that's why we asked that question. This is probably my favorite slide. Would you recommend this process to other libraries? There's no ambiguity there. So everyone that we visited. So I know that we've all probably been involved in different programs. And you hope to have a higher degree of people who would say, yeah, they'd recommend it. But to have that sort of endorsement, that made us feel good, and it continues to inspire us as we button this toolkit up and get ready to deliver it to others. So our next steps are, I'll be in New Mexico next week, now that I remember. Next week, visiting some tribal libraries with our friends in New Mexico. We've got some scheduled for Pennsylvania, and then some in South Dakota. And I was born in South Dakota, and I was supposed to go there in February. And guess what? The weather came. I didn't know why we were doing a February visit, because the weather came through, and I looked at the weather, and I said, I called up the team, and I said, I'm calling it. We're not going to go. Let's schedule this for May. And I could hear audible relief on the other end of the phone with the people who were going to travel with me, because they didn't want to cancel the visit. But we'll be going to South Dakota when the weather's nice, and it's beautiful in springtime. We're going to keep making the iterative updates to the toolkit and materials, and we're literally doing these to the last minute. So we've got 3 more states to visit. We're not done. We need to see how those are experienced in those different states and what changes that we might need to make. That's what's been successful about the project so far. In fact, I just did the first draft of this, the brief report on the key findings, common issues, and everything that's required from IMLS to be responsible for the money that they gave us, and to give a report so that people can see. We're going to distribute the toolkit under a Creative Commons license so that anyone can use it and iterate on this. So we're hoping that people take the ball and run, and we'll be sure to let people know in the library community how to get a hold of it. I think also in my last talks with my project partners, we are looking at ways to extend or to take this idea and give it a little bit more legs and a little bit more power, because where we found things to be very, very strong, we also found an endless bit of need in the state. And Mark was there, we presented it at COSLA, and that was I think maybe our second presentation that we gave to everyone, and we should have known better. We should have known. We're a room full of state librarians. They might, if they like this idea, they might want to get involved. Yes, and that's exactly what happened. Is we had so much demand, we could not meet the demand that had come up, and through that process and through those interactions, we also learned a lot more about what does it mean to get this toolkit into people's hands, and to make sure that there's some support. Because the one thing that I want to make really clear is that we know one of the factors of success is that we had more than one, in a lot of cases, a caring, kind professional who cared about the library's technology and was qualified to help the library with their technology. And we know that that's a factor in the success as well, even though our aim is to have the toolkit be a standalone, and it can be a standalone. But we take questions like that, and we face them head on, because we really want to make a change in the country and improve things. So I'll hand this back to Henry and talk about libraries connecting Texas.
Thanks, Carson. Yeah, so this toolkit that Carson's been talking about is such a great way for sort of closing this IT knowledge gap that you might see in a lot of, especially small rural libraries. And this knowledge is so necessary by library staff across the state, across the country. And I think that's really important, so we're really excited to get to partner. We'll get to hear more about what it's actually like to go through that toolkit, so you'll learn more. But right after that, once you sort of understand at your library better about what's going on with your library, what needs to improve, we wanted to be able to support libraries in a way that would actually help them get those faster speeds. And there is a program out there that was set up by the FCC, puts money on the table directly for libraries, public libraries, to use to get funds to pay for, among other things, internet upgrades. We wanted to leverage that, and it's called E-rate, if you didn't know. And E-rate is used by it's been underutilized in Texas by the libraries. Schools are also eligible for this program. They utilize it a lot more than libraries do. We only had about 23% of public libraries in the last a couple years ago that were taking part in it. We wanted to do better. And so we asked, Mark is here, he was responsible for this, so big applause for Mark. But he succeeded in getting $1 million appropriation from the 85th Texas Legislature to improve the state's library's internet. And so with those funds, we set up a program called the Libraries Connecting Texas. And the way it works is we use E-rate. We both help the libraries apply for E-rate for 2 years so that they can get on the program, get a special help from a professional consulting firm. The consulting firm can help them find faster speeds in their area, so they can kind of help a little bit with that technical side of it. Navigate that program, which can be difficult, can be challenging, especially for first-time applicants. And then at the same time, provide actual funds. So here we have the sort of two parts to this program. We were going to take up, for the first year, take up to 100 applicants, second year take up to another 50, so about 150 we have to work with for 2 years with this consulting firm helping them. And normally consultants for E-rate are expensive, so people can't pay for consultants to get them through the E-rate process. And unfortunately, the program has gotten to the point where we're finding that applicants are often relying more on consultants than ever. And we really wanted to make it so that we could, at the end of this program, have applicants not have to rely on consultants as much. So although they'll have the benefit of the consultants, the hope is that we can also incorporate a training component that will help them sustain the E-rate application beyond the program and continue to do it. We're just kind of giving them a bit of a boost these 2 years. So libraries can get up to a 90% discount depending on their urban-rural status and the poverty level that they might be in their community. That's huge discounts. In fact, about 75% of our libraries get an 80% discount already, with about a quarter getting a 90%. So we get really a lot of money to take advantage of to pay for that monthly cost to the internet. So it seemed like a good opportunity to do that. And then in the second part of the program, we are also, for the first year, so E-rate is done every year, and you start applying in the spring for services to begin in July and last for a year till the end of June. So right now, what we are providing at the state library is an additional subsidy that would pay for the non-discounted part for that first year. So E-rate covers the however much, 20 to 90%, and then the state library pays for the remaining percent for that 1 year. And in the second year, you wouldn't get the subsidy if you participated, but you would get the free E-rate help and the training. So I'm pleased to report on the status today. We just finished the E-rate filing window. It was only a couple weeks ago, so we finally got the numbers in. We had 75 libraries participating in the program that were assisted by our E-rate consultants, which we felt really good about. That was a great percentage of what we'd hoped to get. If you look at that average percent bandwidth increase, we're really pleased with that number. That's more than double their speeds across the board. And you can see that average E-rate cost per library, $7,500. So just looking at the math, you can start seeing that we're just bringing in about $1 million just on its own without even as part of the consulting part, just in the first year. So we're really happy with the success of it so far. And so we'll be issuing the subsidies soon to pay for the speeds this year. That'll be our next step. And then we're gonna, again, for 2019, next year's E-rate cycle, if you didn't participate this year, you can participate again to get that assistance from the E-rate consultants. We're using a nationally known, recognized, one of the top E-rate consulting firms called E-rate Central. And there's plenty more room if you want to take part in that, getting that free help. So definitely let me know if you want to be part of that. And so we'll be reamping. This year, one of the things we did was we, due to the time constraints, we had the consulting firm take over a lot of the filing for them. What we'd really like to do this year is refocus more on the training and make sure that we can get our libraries in a good position to file for themselves beyond the second year. All right, so back to Carson.
All right. So we've been all over the country. What about Texas? And so this is, if you start at the north, that's where I flew in. This was the travel plan to visit 5 places in 5 days and to make sure that we're able to spend at least 3 hours at each site doing that, plus the homework. Guess who has homework to do after each visit? And you got to do your homework that same day because there's a couple of pages of recommendations that are specific to each library, and I did not want them to get all muddled up in my head. So we went to, oh, look at that. There's Henry and Palacios. Look at that. There's Henry. We're getting. Yeah, this is the reverse. We actually ended there and then drove back to Austin, where my wonderful wife came up, and we hung out for the weekend. I think I just collapsed that whole weekend, but we had a good time. So there's Henry and Palacios. We also went to the Harper Library, which is the Harper Library and Resale Shop, and they fund their library through the resale shop. That's the funding for the library. I bought a pair of headphones, old headphones, and some CDs. And
I bought a USB charger.
Henry got a USB charger. So we not only did we go and do the toolkit, but we also helped with the economic development of the Harper Library and Resale Shop. It's a pretty cool place. If you ever, I recommend stopping there. It's really nice, and it's run by volunteers. They're really wonderful folks. We also went to Coleman Public Library. I don't know how many people have been to Coleman, but they've got these beautiful murals downtown, including on the side of the library. You can kind of see it in this picture, but Coleman's really, really fun, really beautiful. We also went to the Carnegie Library of Ballinger, which is another Carnegie building. And then, of course, last but not least, which was actually the first visit, the Stanford Carnegie Library, which is Lucy's library. And so I would like to now hand things over to Lucy to talk about what it was like, because I just have free reign to tell you just how great our program was and how everyone loved it, and I showed you the charts. I think you should hear from somebody who actually had to go through this and in a real way. So Lucy, please come on up.
Thank you, Carson. I've been library director at Stanford Carnegie Library, and I'm non-MLS. Still learning all this stuff every day. I've been there for about 8 years. As a Gen Xer, I grew up using computers, and I've always been comfortable using one, but I'm far from a tech guru. I didn't even know what Internet 2 was before these guys came and visited me. And I had no real knowledge of technical terms or how things really work within our internet setup in our library. It was just a mess of wires to me. And if something went wrong, most of the time I had to call an expert to come fix it, which in our rural area might take weeks or more. We live in kind of the middle of nowhere, farming agricultural community of about 3,000 residents, so it's hard to get support there. Our library visit from Carson and Cindy was really my day of enlightenment. Well, we started our library tech tour. I showed them the dusty closet where our internet setup is and where the wires were, and that was the extent of my knowledge of our setup. If the internet went out, I knew I could unplug and replug the modem to cross my fingers it would come back on. Carson and Cindy walked me through the toolkit, which I brought mine today that we actually used and went through, so if you guys want to look through it. And with the help of their awesome visual diagram, I quickly learned how internet worked, and more importantly, how our internet worked in our library. First off, I learned we had a wireless internet connection picked up by an antenna on our rooftop. They showed me where the internet cable came down from the antenna on the roof and into our building. Carnegie libraries are old. Ours is 108-year-old. It's beautiful. Our facilities for electricity alone in there are awful, and the internet is it's antiquated. So it was not really set up best for it. So I showed them where all the wires were, and that was really the extent of my knowledge. I learned that the crazy box with all the wires was a switch, and updating it from a 10100 to a GB switch would speed up our internet function on all our computers. I learned that our public computers were set up on 2 different banks, and our staff computers were on a separate bank. And then they showed me how these were connected to our printers through our in-house Ethernet. Together we went through all the possible scenarios for where our internet service would possibly be disrupted, from each computer station to the separate banks to our main switch to our router, or finally to the provider level, and showed me a solution how to fix a service disruption at each connection point, which was fantastic. I mean, it was really eye-opening. So now I can do this stuff in-house without having to call somebody most of the time. Before our visit, I knew we had a wireless modem, but our library no longer offered a wireless connection to our patrons because everyone in the neighborhood had found out our password. And this is really not funny. And it crippled our bandwidth. So if I had, first of all, we had like a 1.6 gigabit connection, which is terrible. And if I had like 2 kids on YouTube, I couldn't even send an email. And you've got that whole, neighborhood watching Netflix and stuff, or trying to, and it was crippled. So we just shut off our wireless service. Carson and Cindy told me I could get another router to connect our system through to our provider system, and set up our own password daily, so I'd be able to kick the pirates off, which was great, and take back control of our internet. Since doing that, we've offered wireless again and really had few problems, so that's been really great.
This is the first I've got to hear what happened.
No more internet pirates on
That's
there.
good.
Overall, the best part of the process was not just getting a visit with someone explaining it to me, even though Carson and Cindy were really quite cool and it was a fun visit. And it was hard for you guys to leave. We made friends instantly. But the best part for me was the toolkit itself, because I got to keep it after they left. And I get to take this around everywhere with me. The whole packet is set up very user-friendly, and went through the whole thing with me, identifying how each element was reflected in our library. And various other network upgrades and services we could offer our patrons, like video calls and conferencing. The mysterious technological terms were all easily translated into regular English within the packet, and we personalized it together for exactly what I was working with every day, which was really great. It was so, it was, you took my whole system and you made it something I knew exactly how it all worked. The entire process made it so easy for me to understand and left me with something I could not just look back on and refer to later, but take to my city manager, city council, to show them exactly what kind of setup we had and exactly how it could be improved in the future, without having to call a tech expert to evaluate and explain it. I can't lie, the toolkit did not turn me into a tech genius, but it has equipped me with the knowledge of our library's internet system works, what to do to fix service interruptions, and has given me a solid plan for how it can be better in the future. Now, after the visit, and this is one of those things, life is not always perfect. The toolkit is perfect, and I love it. And I gave you guys the great ratings at 100%. I was one of those. When I signed up for the pilot program, our internet service was painfully slow. Like I said, it was 1.6 megabits per second. It really needed help. But right before our visit, our service provider happened to update their equipment in our building, which bumped up our speed considerably to 13 megabits per second, which was a huge improvement. I had previously been asking my boss, our city manager, to renegotiate our service agreement to get a higher internet speed, but he did not want to pay for an upgrade. We were all pleasantly surprised when the provider increased it on their own through routine equipment maintenance. Our library receives free internet due to a franchise agreement for placement of an antenna on our water tower that they made with the city. So the general thinking from my higher-ups has been, free is better than fast. I was hopeful I could take the toolkit and utilize my knowledge to change their minds and show my need for E-rate to get broadband at an even higher speed for our patrons. Unfortunately, my boss vetoed that for our library from participating in E-rate because it would only provide free service for 1 year, and then we'd have to pay for a new provider. Again, thinking of why pay for improved service when we're already getting with something for free, and that kind of the dollar overruled progress again. But I'm hopeful we can, maybe you guys can continue to offer it. Maybe we can do it next year. On a positive note, this knowledge of power has been power for our library. We might have been turned down at our local level for E-rate, but that is a small challenge. Before this process, I knew we needed things fixed. I didn't know what or how to do it, so I felt helpless to do anything at all. Having this information has really increased my confidence in presenting a plan, educating our local government about our needs, and negotiating what is best for our library.
Nice. So I love how this is an ongoing story. It's not over, right? And that's part of the idea for it. I didn't realize you were going to bring the toolkit with you, because that's part of the reason that it's there, so you can go back and it's like the basics are there. You can refer back to it and talk with knowledge and authority, because it's not rocket science. It's really just seeing what the parts are, what the function of those parts, and then it comes down to strategy. And I love how you described where you have a difference of opinion on what is a solid strategy for internet for your library versus the city, and that's a real conversation that libraries have at all levels. Doesn't matter if they're in a small town or in a huge municipality. It's the same sort of basic, and that's what I of your struggles. That's what I loved hearing the most, is because I didn't hear you thinking you were going to give up on this.
Oh no.
Okay, good. That's right. Okay, good.
Especially not now, with this.
That's
We're
right.
going to take it to council over the manager next time and see what they're willing to say.
There you go. You could say you presented at a statewide conference about this, and that everyone in the room agreed that you should do that. Do we have a unanimous agreement that she should bring it?
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Okay, so it's official. That's official right now. You have unanimous support. Yeah, that's correct. We would. So these are the overview of the programs and the experience. All three of us would love to hear any questions that you have or any comments, anything that you would like to talk about. So just please feel free. Yes.
We have a lot of what you said is good timing for us. Our city is doing its first strategic plan, I think, in forever, and we just had a public meeting with great turnout, and in gathering from the people who were there what mattered to them and what they thought was important for the city. One of the things that really came up was the lack of internet access. And so as a library, this is a place where I feel like we're positioned to take the lead
Yes.
on it. And does the toolkit have anything that would help us leverage that the library is working on providing for the whole community better internet access?
Absolutely, yes. A portion of the toolkit, I know that we talk mostly about the technical aspects because that's what's most challenged, but a portion of the toolkit also addresses the sorts of activities and the things that you're doing in the library, and gives you a chance to inventory those, and those are what you should be using as the talking points when you're talking about, like, what happens after school is out. You see kids in there working, and they're coming in to use technology, use the internet connection. Is there somebody in your community trying to start a business or to use library resources for economic development? All those things, I think, go into those talking points, and so we have a section of the toolkit for that as well. But but don't wait for the toolkit. Just get started. I think thinking around those things that you're seeing, and talking about them now to see what also resonates with your other partners in the community. Anything to add to that?
Oh, that's really good.
Okay.
I mean, there's also the EDGE. I know you take part of the EDGE assessment. If you don't already know about EDGE, it's another assessment tool that looks at a more holistic approach to all the different ways your library could be providing service through technology. And there's a lot of, I think it covers that part too, so it's another tool to look at.
Absolutely. And that's available now, right?
That's
available. The EDGE toolkit is available now. Yes.
So a couple of questions. Is the EDGE, I'm a library professor.
Excellent.
So at Texas Women's University.
Nice.
The EDGE assessment tool, is that free for libraries?
It's free.
Okay, and that's through TSLAC?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, and then...
Everyedge.org.
The Edge.
LibraryEdge.org.
LibraryEdge.org. Okay, great. And then I teach information and communication technology and technology planning. And it seems like what I'd like to do is incorporate the toolkit, the Edge, and all that into the preparation for librarians.
Outstanding, please.
You know, and it's just, yeah, I think that we need to start there, right? Or at least that needs to be part of the flow. And so I'd love to talk more about how we could specifically do that, and seeing real examples is what my students love to see, you know, and hear the real stories of how it's changed the library world. But so anyway, I'd love to work more about, with you about that. And I also teach community informatics. We're rolling out at TWU, and I start with the framework of you as a library are a community anchor institution.
Yes.
Our librarians, I don't know, are familiar with that term.
They're by and large not throughout the country.
This is
it's
like
a
new
different,
to them.
yeah, it's a different
Schools,
world.
libraries, and rural healthcare organizations
Yeah.
in particular, but now a whole variety of other institutions. So we're doing that at TWU, is getting that lingo out there, and I noticed it was part of the Internet 2 flow.
Yes, absolutely. And for everybody, if you want to get a notice when the toolkit's released, we're going to do the best thing that we can do to promote it. But you know how that goes. It's easy to miss things in the flow of information. Just drop me a line, and I'll make sure that you're on the tickle list, tickler, and let you know that things are out there and ready to go. But yeah, please do that, because that's our intent for making the toolkit. We think that the elements can be and should be used in other contexts. They should be used in any way that is effective, whether it's through teaching. So I would think that through teaching, an observation that I'd make in library land is that we have a lot of different siloed efforts, and they're all really, really good efforts, but they're not necessarily linked together in the strongest way. And so anything that can be done, especially from a teacher, from someone that's learning the profession and coming out, I think that's wonderful. So that sounds great.
So I really liked what Lucy said about how you help her to kind of get a comprehensive view of how how elements of her network fit together. So that's going to be something that the toolkit will walk libraries through, how to do that.
Yes.
So that can be a little tricky, right? I mean, figuring that out.
It is very tricky, and that's one of the kind of the BHAGs, the big, hairy, audacious goals that we had throughout this, is how much of a standalone can this be? And both Henry and Cindy just joined us, can attest to that was a healthy tension. That's been a healthy tension throughout the toolkit, because at some level there's technical information that we can't whitewash. We can't call it something else. It's just we need to have a level of education so that you understand. At the same time, we know it's more powerful if there's somebody standing side by side going through the toolkit, and we also want people to have a good chance to be able to go through it themselves as a layperson and walk through it. So the process does turn into the broadband improvement plan. That's what we provided for each library, and we're providing that as a template from the answers are from the sequence in the toolkit. So the elements are certainly there with that intent, and we hope to see that folks are able to make that bridge. We've been, of course, observing as best we can, and we know that for some that'll continue to be a struggle. Some people just get stuck.
Yeah. And I have another question for Lucy. Why couldn't you just change the password?
Because, well,
you didn't control it.
I'd have to call our service provider and usually wait about a half hour to an hour to talk to somebody. They were in a town 40 miles away. Talk to somebody on the phone and get them to change it, and asking them to change it every day was just, you can't really ask that of them.
Right. They might say no, or they might stop taking your calls, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to comment to what you just said before about explaining it, that there's this brilliant diagram in the toolkit that starts with internet and then how it's connected to your building. So they walk me through every stage of this, and to each little element in the diagram, we went to where ours was, and I learned about it, and it made it so easy.
Right on. The picture's worth 1,000 words.
It really
right?
is, yeah.
Good. Yes? And
My
then-
library shares a building with every other department for the city. Would that be something that would almost like disqualify me, or how would?
Well, disqualify for...
Well, just for I guess, for this program?
So, no, no.
You mean you read?
Yeah.
There's a, don't you have to
Because
take
we
out a
share,
percentage?
we share everything, the whole, so like water department, courts.
I see.
police, we all share the same,
There are ways to cost allocate.
Yeah.
okay.
So
If
it's
you
not
got a
like
separate
impossible.
line that goes into the library, they
Yeah.
can, they can.
As long as you can figure out a way to show that the internet part of that's going to the library part is getting the discount and nothing else,
Okay.
then you can do it. And plenty of people do that.
I have a question.
Yes.
I noticed that on your map, your lines go only to the middle of Texas.
Yes.
And we're way in deep South Texas, are the lines ever going to?
So I knew that would come up because the question is this is so great. Why didn't you come to see me? Right?
Yeah.
And it's a good question. Let me pull up that map too so you can see it. I'll go back. One of the challenges that we had is that we only had we initially had funding to visit 30 libraries in the country. That was our aim, to pilot the process out, and we've been able to visit more libraries than 30 throughout the whole country. We just weren't able to get everywhere that we needed to go. We know that there's more need throughout Texas. This was the libraries the other ones that you see were actually other libraries that were participating in the intake survey that we were not able to get into the visit. So it came down to logistics. So I apologize that we didn't come out.
And then I have another question.
Yes.
I live in Hidalgo County, which is way in deep South Texas.
Yeah.
And most of the cities are in a line, like maybe 5 miles from the border.
Okay.
And they have good internet access, but everything to the north and everything to the south doesn't. So, and then like I wanted to move to a community that doesn't have any good option for internet access.
Yeah.
Only by satellite or cellular.
Okay.
But Time Warner comes to about 2 miles from the city on one side
Okay.
and a few feet, because there's an international bridge
Yeah.
just a few hundred feet from the edge of the city. But they won't jump in. Is there any way do you know of any way that we can convince them to just bring their wiring down a little bit so that the community can have internet access?
That's a good question.
And they
because
say,
that's
well, there's no guarantee that we're going to have customers, so, like we don't want to spend all the money.
And when you're facing those issues, because I know, Henry, that has come up, and how have you been trying to get? Because the idea is that you do get people together to say there is demand, and I can show you the demand that we have, and so you can talk about it from the library perspective, of course, right? You can say we're seeing
Well, we
this.
don't have a library, but we plan to open one like in a couple of years.
Okay. So you don't have
But
that
we
track
have
record
school
yet. Yes.
children in the town, and they're at a very big disadvantage.
Yes.
They don't.
Yeah, I mean, it's about getting yourself at the table with the right folks and
Yeah.
working with the schools but yeah, it's about communication and reaching out to the right folks. But I don't have any obvious answers.
I think looking at the other, if you can, just talk informally with other organizations, so people that would represent other people. So like Henry said, the schools, but also the city, the fact that a library is coming in.
Our children go to school, well, I don't have children. Well, I don't live there, right? I live in Edinburgh, which
Okay.
we do have internet access, but we're planning to move there in a couple of years.
Yeah.
And the school does have internet access. And I'm very familiar with the E-rate program because I worked with it from year
Okay.
1 through to 2013 when I retired.
Bless you.
And that's something I don't need.
Good for you. Good for you for doing that.
And I called them the other day, and they just sort of like, well, it's a problem, we know, but we can't do anything about it. It's what they told me.
With the library coming, though,
Yes.
that might be, and I don't know the area well enough to give you very good advice, but I would say that the idea that a library is coming and that internet access is essential and crucial for a library, that may be a very powerful talking point to just come back and circle around it. Yes.
There was an article in the Rural Electric magazine in the last few months, I think probably late last year, and technology exists. I want to say Bandera, maybe, the Bandera Co-op,
Okay.
is providing internet to the library
Yeah.
through the rural electric system.
That is one of the options. We have Magic, no, VTC Valley Telephone, but that's through satellite too.
Okay.
Yeah. And this seems like partially radio waves maybe, but I don't know how to convince more rural electric co-ops
Mhm.
that
Right.
consider this. There's a market
Absolutely.
for your investment in this technology, because we don't have fiber optics.
Absolutely, that's right. And I was going to give you a time check to everybody. It's 2:33 right now. We're over just by a second. But please, you had one last question.
Sorry, it's very similar. I was just wondering if there are any, like maybe government programs we could take to counties that would actually bring providers, because there is a huge demand, but just because so many people in our area own huge acreage,
Right.
there's no justification. Even if everyone in that whole part wants internet, they still won't build a line because there just aren't enough people per square foot.
Yeah, and
Square mile. So is there anything that actually would bring providers to areas?
There are other federal programs
Okay.
that support providers, like the E-rate program. There's other universal service fund programs that will underwrite rural providers to expand access. So there is a program that does that, and in theory, there will be more funding for rural infrastructure. I mean, it's one of the things the current White House is looking at.
Right.
So I think the Department of Agriculture and Rural Utility Service, I think it's worth checking into. I
Ours
don't
is
know
awful, but it's
how well-
tolerable. But we're
Sure.
starting a nonprofit deeper, and there's
there's and I'll end on this because we should get out for the next people. But there's a lot of moving parts in the telecom space. What means the most is you as a local resident are making noise about it, positive noise, talking about this is a need and being positive about that, and not giving up, talking about it and exploring different things that might be there. Because as you dig into, as you start digging below the surface, you can sometimes find other options. If one entity isn't able to provide it, you might be able to find it through another or through another partner. And there's new opportunities coming up every day. You never know when the right federal program might be there at the right time for somebody locally who wants to make an investment because they can do something with microwave, for instance, and they'll say, yeah, I'll be on this, because I've seen that throughout Texas as well. I'm sorry, we've got to stop this, but thank you very much, everyone, for coming. Have a wonderful rest of the day today.